Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, our guest is Steve Rubin. He owns KTOX in Needles, California, but he doesn't live anywhere near Needles, California. We're going to find out how he remote controls his station, including putting himself on the air, screening phone calls, and putting ball games on the air. It's pretty amazing what he does, all remotely with easy technology. We're checking it next on TWiRT. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By the Ruby Console from Lavo. See Lavo in your future at lavo.com/TWiRT. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. And by the CalRec Type R console system. Type R is a brand new, modular, expandable IP-based radio system from CalRec Audio. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone, the light bulb at the top of the tower. And in fact, I saw a picture of our guest doing something with a light bulb at the top of the tower. I got to get the story behind that picture, and I didn't set the picture up for Suncast, so we'll just have to talk about it. But hey, welcome in. I'm Kirk Harnack, broadcasting to you live right now from the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee, otherwise known as my office. I'm glad to be here. Hey, normally Chris Tobin is here, and he is on the way. Apparently, they kicked him off a New Jersey Transit train a little while ago. And he is making his way back to his home or the home of one of his buddies, and he'll be joining us in about 20 minutes, he said. We'll see. Meanwhile, we've got a great show for you. Without further ado, let's just bring him on in. Our guest is coming to us from Needles, California, oftentimes the hottest place in the U.S., from KTOX Radio. Welcome in, Steve Rubin. Hi, Steve. Glad you're here.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you, man. How are you?
Good.
You're a station owner, and you're also one of these guys that you seem to love technology. Am I right about that?
Definitely.
So, if I've seen your post on Facebook, you own a station, you do all the engineering. We'll get into the remote controlling that you do in a few minutes, but you're also an airplane pilot. Tell us about that interest.
Yes, I've been flying for maybe about 20 years now, and finally graduated to a multi-engine plane a couple of years ago, and really enjoying that. Especially all these long flights back and forth across the desert in the middle of the night had me a little nervous with one engine over the desert.
Well, you've got a pretty good, well-respected twin-engine plane. You can tell us about it in a minute, but I had always heard that in a twin-engine plane, if one engine failed, the other engine would take you to the scene of the accident. Now, is that true or not?
Yeah, I mean, on takeoff, it definitely is true. But once you're in cruise, you're better off with two.
Yeah. I've got about 500 hours, all single engine, and all VFR except for a couple of short, scary experiences.
Yeah, those are always fun.
I have flown right seat with IFR with a friend, and we even landed in Birmingham, Alabama, on fumes. Well, we had some fuel. Years ago, but that was an interesting experience. It turned out the ADF receiver didn't work, and we couldn't land at Anniston, Alabama, where we were going to. So, because they didn't have an ILS approach, we had to go back through a thunderstorm to Birmingham and land there, where they didn't have an
receiver.
ILS.
Definitely dates it.
Yes. This was way pre-GPS. It may have, you know what? It had LORAN, and we were trying to make a waypoint with the LORAN, and that wasn't working out. So we said, no, we're just going to go back to Birmingham and land at the big airport.
I flew across the country once with a LORAN, and that's what I love. About halfway across the country was when I learned you have to actually change something when you get to certain points and change the chain or something that it uses.
Yes.
They didn't teach me that before.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. Oh, wow. Well, I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about, but technology, what we're going to be talking about on our show, we're going to take our first break in a sec here, but Steve Rubin is one of these guys who, I think he's the kind of guy that if you got something that needs to get done, give it to Steve, because he's a busy guy and he will figure out how to get it done quickly and efficiently and probably have a lot of fun doing it. And that's the kind of engineer that I really appreciate. Our topic is going to be largely about talking about remote controlling your radio station. And I don't mean just the transmitter, of course, or just turning something on and off, but bringing the audio console controls back to your kitchen or wherever it is convenient for you, and your automation controls, and who knows, maybe even doing some voice tracking or voice work. So we'll talk to Steve about all that. Our show, welcome into it, by the way. Our show This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by, I forgot who's up first. Hey, Suncast, if you'll start the ad, I'll just roll right along with it. Go ahead.
CalRec's Type R is a modular, expandable IP-based radio system featuring 3 slimline panels, a fader panel, a large soft panel, and a small soft panel easily configured to give the operator full control. Layouts are saved and recalled quickly between shows. A single 2RU core with integrated I/O gets customers up and running fast, and that single core can power up to 3 independent mixing environments with no sharing of DSP resources. Available in 4 DSP packs, and as your station grows, larger packs can be added, enabling it to grow with you. Power to the surface is supplied via standard PoE switches, keeping cabling to a minimum. Type R is fully AES67 compatible, as defined by SMPTE 2110, which means that it is also compliant with NMOS discovery and connection management specs. All these features combined make Type R the most flexible radio console you can buy. Find out more at calrec.com/TWiRT.
We sure appreciate CalRec's sponsorship. I had Henry Goodman from CalRec on last week at calrec.com/TWiRT. Hey, studio guests are only human, and humans, well, they cough, they sniff, and they clear their throats, even on air. You can cure this with the Angry Audio Guest Gizmo. Press the cough button and mute the mic. Every single guest needs one of these. And you know what else they need? Headphones, which is why each guest gizmo has a studio quality headphone amp with individual volume control. Anything else? Well, you've seen those mic arms with those built-in LED tallies. They're beautiful. But how do you get the light to come on? Well, Guest Gizmo does that too, illuminating the red light whenever the mic is hot. And installing the Guest Gizmo in your studio couldn't be easier. All you need is that, a 2 3/4-inch hole saw, and a steady hand. No router required. Your studio gets a clean, custom appearance, and you get all the credit. Check out the Guest Gizmo and all the other cool gadgets at angryaudio.com. That's angryaudio.com. Thanks a lot, Angry Audio, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. And when I say they do have other cool things, they do. They really do. angryaudio.com. Please check them out and let them know that we sent you. Appreciate it very much. All right, it's Kirk Harnack and Steve Rubin. We're waiting on Chris Tobin to arrive. He'll arrive when he arrives, when New Jersey Transit, says he can arrive. In the meantime, though, Steve Rubin. So, Steve, I first heard of you through our mutual friend, Joe Talbot. How do you know Joe?
I've known Joe a number of years. I'm not sure exactly how I met him. Local Bay Area radio people all seem to know each other. So.
Yeah. And so tell me about your journey to purchasing KTOX. How did you become a station owner?
I worked in radio in college, and mostly just like as a board op, and occasionally they let me turn a screw or something. And then they found out I knew how to fix computers, so they were always having me fix their computers. This was before stations were automated, really. So I kind of left the industry for a while and worked at a number of internet service providers and carriers, and always did occasional radio things for people. And then we sold our internet service provider business a couple years ago, and kind of got the bug again. So I ended up buying KTOX in Needles, and then buying a few stations in the last auction and building those, and then bought another FM station in California as well, up on the coast.
How big a town is Needles, where you are now?
It used to be a lot bigger. It used to be our station's actually right on where Route 66 was. The street is actually Route 66 Place. I think it's a couple thousand people now. It used to be a lot bigger back in the Route 66 heyday.
That gives me an idea. If it's a couple thousand people, you probably don't have an enormous pool of advertisers available for unlimited income, do you?
There's a couple other bigger cities nearby, like Havasu City and Bullhead City and Laughlin, Nevada, are also really close by. So we probably cover 70,000 people. So it's not too bad.
So that becomes viable. Yeah, that does.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, though, I understand that I think you mentioned this on Facebook. Reliable employees to run a high school football game or something like that, not always easy to find in a small town. And sometimes it's better if you have the technology to just do it yourself. But you've figured out how to do it yourself from your kitchen table many, many miles away. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So this kind of started, I had installed when I first bought the station, I gutted it and installed all Axia equipment. So I knew I had the capability of doing some of it. And we had an employee that wanted to start doing some high school football games. And I said, well, let's give it a shot and see what happens.
So the employee goes out to the football game and remotes with a codec or something back to the studio, but there's nobody at the studio to run it.
He has a remote mix too, and a headset and a mic, and that's plugged into an iPhone or an iPad or something running LinPhone, and that would just do a G722 call into our and I think we had the VX then at that point.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're not using a separate codec system like an outdoor unit and an indoor unit. You're just using your Telos VX phone system because it does the G722 codec, which sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah, no, it sounds great. We've done it a couple different ways. We also own a couple other codecs that we'll do, but usually we use G722 because it just works.
So you mentioned
firewalls and NAT or anything.
Yeah, you mentioned this product called LinPhone, and that's a soft phone for your Android or your iPhone. And I'm guessing here, but I guess your LinPhone, you start the program on your play-by-play person does, and the LinPhone becomes an extension off of your phone system at the radio station. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just have a couple hidden extensions we use. It just shows up as a channel on the board, and then I have another one that I dial into, and that gives me kind of a low latency feed into the board, and then I can do talk back with him and queue him and stuff.
So, are you using your own on-site Asterisk PBX, or are you using the worldwide secret Mutel service?
No, we have our own.
Oh, you do?
I haven't connected to Mutel yet. I need to do that.
Okay. Oh, wow. Well, so you have your own on-site Asterisk. How did you come up with that? Did you build it yourself or somebody else do it for you?
We built it because we were using an IQ6 and a channel bank to spit out some VoIP lines into the IQ6. So we've been using Asterisk since for the last 4 years, even before we had the VX.
Okay. Now there's lots of flavors of Asterisk that you can install on a beige box computer. I'm kind of familiar with FreePBX. What are you using there?
Yeah, we're using FreePBX, and it actually is not a bare metal machine that's running inside VMware on a server here. So we only have a couple machines, and most of them are running VMware. So almost everything's inside VMware also. So
you've virtualized the phone system.
Yes.
Wow. And if you think of it, it's kind of two levels of virtualization, because a phone system on premise used to be many years ago, it was a mechanical thing. Then it was a, electromechanical thing. And then it was kind of electric, but still discrete components. And then it became eventually running in Linux on a PC. And you virtualized that now into running in VMware. Holy cow.
Yeah, everything's virtual. Almost everything we have is virtualized. Even some of the playout machines for on air and production.
Well, we're using Rivendell, and your pictures show Rivendell at your stations. That's what you're using?
Yeah, we use Rivendell everywhere.
Yeah, I wish I was more of an expert, but we are using Rivendell on most of our stations, and about half of those are virtualized. What are you using as you said VMware, right? That's your hypervisor?
Yeah. Yeah, it's ESXi.
I've for years on this very program, I have lamented that I got to get learning about this, and so it's across the room here. I can't really show it to you, but for $200 I bought this amazing used Dell R710 server. It's got like 48 gigs of RAM and of course 2 Xeon processors and a couple of rated drives, and I just installed VMware ESXi, and I've been trying to get the client. It's an older version, it's like 4.1, because that's what seemed to be recommended to run on this. And I've been trying to get the Windows client to work so I can connect to it, and I've been having trouble with getting that working. What's your exact setup there?
Web based. So we're using at KTalks. It's an Intel NUC, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and it's running ESXi 6.5, I think, and that's the whole station for on the server side. There's a Synology storage array that handles everything else, and then the main on-air computer is just a standalone NUC that's not running VMware. But I'm actually going to be changing that pretty soon.
Now, okay, I see that Chris Tobin is able to join us here. He can pop in anytime he likes here. So wait, you're running VMware on the NUC, and how many virtual machines are you running on that?
6 or 7, I think.
Okay, I thought that a NUC was a little low-powered little thing. What gives here?
Yeah, it's got 32 gigs of RAM, and then all the storage is external on the Synology NAS. So it holds. I mean, none of the VMs are very big. It's just I think the average Rivendell VM is like 2 gigs, so you can run a few of those on a NUC with no problem.
And the Rivendell instances don't take a lot of CPU power?
Generally, no. And most of them are just doing like audio ingestion and things like that. So even if there's a little bit of jitter, it doesn't affect it too much.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So I have so much to learn. I thought your server running VMware had to be this big hulking hoss of a thing that took 2 men, a boy, and a dog to get into and out of the rack. You're saying that's not necessarily the case.
No, runs just fine on most of the Intel NUCs, depending on the version of ESXi and which particular NUC you have.
Oh my gosh! Was that
the
NUC?
NUCs are small, but they're pretty powerful.
Well, was that like a $600 or $800 version, or what kind of retail or what'd you pay for those things?
It's the old 5th generation NUC. I think it was probably $400 or $500.
Okay. Well, at least I feel a little bit better because
3 or 4 years ago. So
yeah, I got my whole Dell server here for $200. So quite used. Wow, I'm amazed. Okay, well, I may have to upgrade to some newer hardware and run a newer version of ESXi.
There's some huge performance differences in the newer versions.
Oh, the new ESXi versions?
Yeah, like 6.5 and 6.7 have some huge improvements.
Oh, okay. I'm writing that down. ESXi 6.5 or 6.7. Okay, all right. Well, I may have to change my game plan here, but I'm learning. Still trying to install the Windows. The Windows client for the older VMware was not at all happy with Windows 10, and I've got Windows 7 on. I've got Windows 7 on another machine here. I'll try doing that. Hey, if Chris Tobin is here, you want to pop on in, Chris?
Hey, I'm here. Sorry for the delay.
Hey,
but all
no
good.
worries. They kicked you off for bad behavior or what?
Well, that's really what it came down to, not mechanical problems. No, it's just the ongoing commuting issues here in New York City, and it's just rather than fix the problem, they just put more money and buy trains and claim it's going to solve the problem. Like, well, if you don't have enough people driving them or repairing them correctly, what's the point? So, yeah, but I was able to find other ways to get here quicker and quickly. That is, and I managed to do it right, so it worked out.
Well, good. Well, we've been talking about Steve Rubin's, and by the way, Steve meet Chris, Chris meet Steve.
Hello.
So Steve's Chris, this is where, gosh, I don't know what to do. So I've spent $200 and I've got this, it's across the room. I really can't show it very easily. I've got this big hulking Dell R710 server. As I've told Steve, it takes 2 men, a boy, and a dog to get this thing in or out of a rack. Either that or a server jack, and I put ESXi 4.1 or something like that on it. Now I'm trying to get the web client, the Windows client, to run so I can go get into it and do something. And Steve tells me he's running VMware ESXi on an Intel NUC. I'm going, huh?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
You got to remember, virtual machines. It's all based on what it is you're trying to create as a virtual machine.
Right.
I heard him say that the Rivendell virtual machine package he's put together is about 2 gigs or thereabouts. So it's a combination of what is it the application that you're trying to do in the virtual world? Does it need for resources? How does it manipulate? And depending on what you have, if it doesn't require many resources or clock cycles, as I like to call it, then you can get away with a very small system. But if you're looking to do something that's a little heavier duty, then yeah, you're going to need a larger, in your case, the larger server frame. But yeah, virtualization, you have to look at what your application is, and that'll help you. I'll say scale it, accordingly. And Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the best approach to take. Because I'm running a couple of really slow old PCs with virtual machines to run some news software, and it's you wouldn't even know that it's a virtual machine. The news people screw up stuff, they corrupt things. I just blow it out, put back the new image, and we're done. And it works, and it's literally running, I think, 16 gig of RAM, and it's not even an i3 processor. I think it's like a dual core desktop.
Oh my gosh!
It's working
wow.
fine with 4 users, 4 users logging in and out for newsroom audio and for scripting.
Now, I guess there's big differences in you're right. The app. I've got a Dell R710 in we're in Mississippi, in Greenville, Mississippi, and it's not running any hypervisor. It's just running Windows 10. And in Windows 10, it's running a number of audio processors and encoders for stream encoding. And several of those audio processors are the Omnia 9 style processing, which is a pretty good CPU hog. And so I think I've got about 5, maybe 4 Omnia 9s running in there. And it's using a good 40-45% of the available CPU power. So I mean, each one is taking, I guess, roughly 9, 10, 11% of the CPU's cycles, if you want to look at it that way.
So there you go. Now, there's a perfect example. Yeah,
there's something that does take a bunch. In Hawaii, at our stations there, a friend of mine built up a virtual machine using KVM as the hypervisor, and he put a couple of Windows instances in there, and one of them was for my streaming. Now we're just doing one Omnia 9 processing there, but at first he didn't allocate enough CPU to it, and it kept maxing out the CPU cycles on that VM. So he remotely got in there and gave me another core or something. And so now it runs adequately, and it's not affected. The other things that are going on in that machine aren't doing much. But I guess Rivendell is not taking a whole lot of resources, is it, Steve? And you've got all your audio stored in a NAS, in a different piece of hardware.
Yeah, so I've noticed that on the VMware stuff, the Rivendell doesn't use too much CPU, but I have an Omnia 9 also for the encoding, and it uses, the same CPU or more as every other thing on the machine combined. So it's eating quite a bit of the CPU on the hypervisor.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we also have like Media Shooter running in a VM, and a few the Asterisk runs in a VM, and done a few other things that are in there. The whole station can run off one NUC, really.
So thinking about, you mentioned a few things that a lot of stations have. A lot of stations have Media Shooter Pro, I suppose. Isn't that the Mr. Master product?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got some processing and streaming going on, and your automation, your Rivendell automation. You mentioned earlier you have free PBX running. How did you divide up the responsibilities either of different physical NUCs, machines, and how did you divide up the responsibilities of different virtual machines? And when do you decide just to run several applications in the same VM'd OS? What's your thinking on that division of responsibility?
I'm a big fan of every task gets its own VM. So I generally won't have one VM do multiple things. So there's the one VM running FreePBX isn't doing anything else. The Rivendell is just doing Rivendell. It's not doing any side projects. So that's kind of how I do it. And then sometimes I'll let the VMware can automatically move virtual machines between hypervisors, even while they're turned on and powered on working, and to balance the load between them. And so usually I'll just let that happen on its own. And then, or there's another mode where you can have it tell you recommendations to move stuff around. That way you're not, having a couple seconds of audio dropouts while you're doing it.
Okay, now you just kind of skimmed over really fast something that I've heard about and never done. Can you go into a little bit more depth explaining what this automatic load balancing is?
Yeah, so you can put if you have multiple hypervisors, you can have it. It just watches and it knows. You can tell it like the constraint is memory or the constraint is CPU, and you can say try to keep the load balanced between the machines, or try to keep, if a machine gets over 80%, then start moving stuff off. You can do it either way, and you can have it migrate the machines automatically, or you can have it just give you hints like, hey, do you want to do this? And it's called vMotion. If you vMotion a machine from one hypervisor to another, you can do it without downtime generally. If you were streaming audio off of it, it would cut out for a second or two probably.
Yeah.
But most type things wouldn't see a hiccup at all. I've done it, and maybe you'll drop one packet if you're pinging it or something.
Is vMotion and something that you pay for that costs, or can you get it for free, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's part of their pay portion of it.
Okay. Wow. All right. I saw vMotion. I thought, well, what is that? Is that some cool rendering engine or what? No, it's for moving.
Well, they've got another one where it actually it keeps the memory in sync from the same virtual machine on two hypervisors, and so if the machine just died, it'll just pick up where it left off on the other hypervisor. So you can unplug the computer.
Wow. I feel so behind in all this. This is so good to know, though. And now I'm getting my feet wet in it now for sure. Well, tell you what, let's, I want to talk about your actual practices in remote controlling the station, and what you can do and what is a shortcoming. What can't you do remotely? But first, we're going to take another break, and we're going to save Steve's story for remote control, which is what I'm really, really want to hear about as we continue. If you've just tuned in, it's Kirk Harnack and Chris Tobin, along with Steve Rubin, our guest on This Week in Radio Tech. It's episode 441, and we're talking about remote control and virtual machines, apparently, and doing things a whole lot maybe easier than I even thought it could be done. So it's great to learn all this. Our show is brought to you in part by the Henry Sportscaster from Broadcaster General Store. Let's hear about that. Oh, we're going to hear about it from me. The Sportscaster. Hey, we got to talk. Chris Tobin and I got to talk with Hank Landsberg about the Sportscaster just a couple weeks ago at the NAB show. And man, this box is even cooler than I've been telling you about. I've been kind of hitting all the high points, but let me hit a few more of them for you. The Sportscaster is an audio mixer and intercom system built into one. So if you do, especially, high school or even college sports, and you televise these, you've got, 1, 2, 3 cameras out there to do this. This is the perfect thing to have to mix your microphones together, to have a producer on site if you want to have a field reporter on site, and to have headsets for your camera operators. They can have headphones, I should say. And then each of your announcers needs to get one of these sports pods from Henry. So you get 3 sports pods and your Sportscaster mixer and intercom system. And oh my goodness, you've got a complete audio production facility for doing your live broadcast. And it doesn't have to be a sports broadcast. Hey, it could be the NFL draft, which is going on today and tomorrow here in Nashville. Thousands of people are downtown for the NFL draft. But you could do baseball. You could do soccer. You can do high school football. And you could do parades. Any kind of remote reporting that you're going to be doing, where you have more than one person out there in the field. This is a great way to do it. You get talent headphone audio distribution. So the headphone amps are built in there. You get talkback and intercom mic facility for the producer. You get duplex intercom between the producer and the talent. You get producer headphone audio mixing, headphone mix for field reporter and the camera operators. You get a field reporter headphone output too, so that person can hear what's going on. Duplex intercom between the producer and the field reporter. You getting the idea here? This is a complete communications and audio mixing system. Plus, there's a Q bus if you want to audition auxiliary sources. And of course, there's a main program output to air or to streaming. So you can put this into your codec and send it back to the station. You can, if you're using any kind of a remote, audio video system, you can just, this is your audio feed right there. So the broadcast team can include all the people like producer, play-by-play announcers, field reporters, camera operators. The announcers call the game using the sports pods, and the field reporter can also be mixed in as well as the crowd mic and PA announcer or other audio source. Just so cool. Check this thing out. You can go to the website HenryEng, that's HenryEng.com, and look for the Sportscaster. That's the name of this box. 1RU. It's got all the XLR connectors on the back and the mini plugs for the headphones. It's got all the adjustments on the front, and buttons and controls, and LED VU meters. You can get the levels right. It's pretty awesome. Check it out. And if you didn't happen to see it, you could go back to our previous episode, a couple episodes back, actually, where we did the show from NAB and see the interview with Hank Landsberg, and he explains more about the Henry Sportscaster right there. All right. Thanks a lot to Broadcaster General Store for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. I should tell you can call Broadcaster General Store at 352-622-7700. Their website, though, is really easy. 5 simple letters and a period. It's bgs.cc. bgs.cc, and that's where you can find out more about the Henry Sportscaster. Give them a call. Love those folks at Broadcaster General Store. All right. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack and Chris Tobin and Steve Rubin. We're talking remote operations. And for those of you who don't know, this very show that you're watching or listening to is also produced remotely. I can't give away all the details. Some people want to remain hidden. But the studio is actually in New York. It's in the New York City area. It's in one of the boroughs. And the show is being remote controlled by our favorite producer, Suncast. And it's just amazing what he can do to all the equipment remotely. So this stuff can work. Steve Rubin, I want to hear about your what motivated you to see, you know what, by golly, I've got to run my station from the kitchen. What motivated you?
Well, the other day they wanted to do a live remote from a store on April 20th, and the person that normally runs the board for the show wanted to be there also doing the remote. So I told them that I would run the board for them, and I actually originally planned on being down in Needles, but I happened to be home at the time. So I decided I could take care of it remotely.
So you mentioned you have some Axia gear. So audio over IP technology is probably part of the key to this kind of thing working, right?
It certainly helps. I can't imagine doing it without that.
So I've seen pictures that you've posted on Facebook of your setup. Tell me about your setup. Well, let's look at the station. What do you have at the radio station that gets remote controlled?
There's the VX, obviously, the console's a Fusion, and I guess that's about it, actually.
Oh, here's a picture. Look. Tell us what we're looking at in this picture.
Well, that's a secret picture. That's actually
I'm sorry.
a Fusion. No, it's fine. It's a Fusion console running in VMware and being remotely controlled.
I won't tell anybody. It's okay. We love home experimenters. It's fine.
Okay.
So wait, the Fusion console, it worked pretty good, didn't it? Yeah. That's what I've heard from some other guests on the show. Okay, here's a picture we can show, right?
Yeah, that was from this weekend.
Yeah. So
that's just the Rivendell window up on kind of behind the console control window. Unfortunately, I didn't have a big monitor handy, so it was kind of flipping between the two, which made it actually really difficult to do.
You were roughing it with a laptop.
Yeah. Wow. At the very bottom, you can see the VX producer.
Oh, so we were
taking calls too.
Yeah, you run the assistant producer program. Wow. Okay. So how much bandwidth do you need between the two, and can you hear what you're doing in real time?
Yeah, I can. I use another SIP channel for listening in real time and queuing the guys. And I actually popped open my mic a few times and talked on the air a couple times when they had calls and stuff. But the biggest challenge is, as we were discussing earlier, sometimes the internet here in town is not very good, so it can be a little troublesome at times.
Now, if we could bring that picture back up, that software that had the faders on it, that looks like the Axia SoftSurface software, which is specifically made to remote control our consoles at Axia, right?
Yeah, I'm a little behind. I haven't tried IP Tablet yet. So.
Yeah. It's really cool. There's definitely some setup involved, but that product, SoftSurface, was made to do what you're doing, right?
Yeah, no, and it works great. I mean, it's been the only thing I noticed with it was if I try to run the program at home over our VPN, sometimes the latency causes problems between it and the power station. So I found that it works better if I run it on a Windows machine locally in the studio and then VNC into that computer.
Interesting. You bring up an interesting point. That particular product, and I'm saying this not as a commercial for Axia, but just to give you some kind of behind the scenes. When that SoftSurface was developed, the developers thought that people were going to be using it on the same network in the same building as the thing they were controlling. And of course, people are. That's fine. It's a perfectly good replacement for a physical audio console. But then, of course, we out in the field said, but guys, we need it to work remotely too. And so I don't know that it's been optimized for that yet. We have other things. And I'm sure other companies do too. They're working on other products that really, really do work over distance and feel real time, and they're meant to do that. But you do VPN in, so technically your laptop is on the same network as at the studio, right?
It's a different subnet, but everything can reach each other from the two different networks. But the latency it would get confused and think it was disconnected and then reconnected and then disconnected and then reconnected. And I found that out the hard way during our remote once. So I just started running it on a local machine after that.
So to really work remotely, it needs to be a little bit more forgiving.
Yeah.
Of latency. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Now the Rivendell that we saw behind the SoftSurface, that's also your VNC'd into that, right?
Yeah, so I have multiple VNC windows open and I'm controlling multiple things, which does get, a little bit troublesome at breaks because I have to make sure they don't talk until, give me about 10 seconds to start the commercial and then switch windows and then pot them down.
I'm guessing
they usually remember.
I'm guessing when you have time to set it up, you're usually on your 4K monitor and you could have, plenty of monitors on the same screen.
It's much easier on a bigger monitor.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Chris, I know you're very familiar, Chris, with how GFQ gets this show and others done with Suncast in one part of the country and the studio there in the New York City area. Chris, what are you seeing around New York? I would think that most stations around New York, people are sitting there at the control console. Is there any remote control going on in your neck of the woods?
I have not heard of anyone doing it that way. I mean, you have to bear in mind here in New York City, and I'm sure the same as, say, in Boston, Chicago, or Los Angeles, it's you're talking lots of dollars per minute that can be lost if you do something that doesn't work exactly as planned. Now, I do know that a lot of folks, when they go on location, they do a lot of remoting from there. But as far as a regular, say, broadcast day or portions of it, best of my knowledge, nobody's doing it in that fashion. I think it's just too high risk at the moment for advertising dollar concerns. Yeah.
Steve, you said a minute ago that for that there's a recent broadcast where you actually got on the air a couple times to do something. What's your method what's your microphone? What's your method of providing that audio back at the studio so that you can bring it up on the console that's physically there at the studio? How do you do that?
Usually if I'm in my office, I just have a regular RE20 or something plumbed into the computer, and then I use LinPhone to connect into the secret extension that thinks it's a microphone on the console, and then I'll talk on that. Over the weekend, I just had my Apple earbuds in and was just talking to them that way. The audio wasn't very good, but it was good enough to tell them they had to call or give them some grief about something.
So, and under reasonable conditions, though, I realize you're probably using the G722 codec, right? Between LinPhone and VX. Yeah. So, just a reminder, that is a 7.5 kilohertz codec. You hear a lot of times on sports broadcasts, even on network radio sports broadcasts. It's like the fallback, for a lot of people, it's the main, but it's easily the fallback codec that just works in a lot of situations. It's been around for so long, and it's in so many products that, nowadays, there may be a product that has AAC, one codec has AAC, another brand of codec has AAC, and the two AACs won't talk to each other because of a number of very frustrating factors. MPEG layer 2 is pretty commonly, addressable between different brands. That's a common, fallback or common denominator. But G722 is probably the world's common denominator in talking. And since, as you mentioned, Steve, the Telos VX system natively speaks G722, and products like LinPhone and some other software phones speak that too. So yeah, you can be on the air. It's not, beautiful 20 kilohertz audio, but 90% of the human voice's energy is in, probably more than that, is within 7.5 kilohertz. And so it's okay. So that is fascinating that you can put yourself on the air remotely like that. What aside from the difficulty of using the SoftSurface remotely and the little timing problems that you encountered, what other things did you have to learn along the way that you weren't expecting?
I think the one that got us a couple times, or at least the first time, was I think the same thing that gets everyone when they try to use a cell phone for a remote is it worked great until a bunch of people showed up.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. So we've had that get us a couple times. 2 of our stations are in places that don't have very good cell phone service in general. So sometimes it just doesn't work at all. So we've had to do other things when that happens. Sometimes they have Wi-Fi we can get on, but a lot of times we're setting up temporary wireless links or the modern Marty, also known as the Ubiquity radios. And,
yes, the modern Marty.
Yeah,
Chris Tobin knows about the modern Marty. One thing, a couple solutions. And I know you've thought of these or seen these. I had a gentleman who owns some stations in California, I think, or maybe Central California. Anyway, he was using the Lucy Live software on his phone back to a Telos Zip 1 codec at the studio. And he would do long form high school football games. But his trick was he would always take 2 phones on 2 different networks. And sure enough, partway through halftime, one of them would the data rate would get bad, and he would just try the other one, and chances are the other one would actually work okay. So they would end up just different locations. One was favored over the other. So that was a good poor man's way. Just grab your sales manager and bring his put Lucy Live on his phone too and bring that. But it seems like a modern solution to this that's not too expensive is this Max Connect service. And we've talked to Josh Bone, who has designed that service, at least for his customers. You basically, with that, you have a Cradle Point modem, but the secret's not the Cradle Point. The secret is the type of account that Max Connect arranges for you that is, I'm not going to say non-interruptible, but you're guaranteed a data rate. No matter if there's 20,000 people out there, you get your own little pipe and it's yours, and their bandwidth doesn't affect it. I think it's one level down from first responders in terms of its data priority. Is that
yes,
it? Chris, you want to tell us about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I have done many, I'll use, say, multiple mobile modem routers for diversity purposes. And yeah, you can make it work. And in some cases, you luck out. And depending on which LTE site you get, and LTE by design has about 5 different parameters it looks at for a connection for a user equipment, in this case, a mobile router. And depending how well you're connected and where you are and at what management is being done, you may get a decent bandwidth and stay with it, even though the area gets populated, say at a sports bar or an arena. But what Josh is doing with Max Connect Wireless is basically going to the carriers themselves. In this case, I believe it's Verizon Wireless and AT&T, and saying, look, here's what I know you have. I know it's a service you provide. Let's do a deal. Sort of like a MVNO, which is a mobile virtual network operator approach. And he gets a carved out bandwidth, data stream off the network, and the ID of the SIM card that you use from him. You don't use your SIM card. You actually create an account through him. And that way, when you're on the network, it knows who you are, and you get prioritized. It's been a concept that's been used for years. I mean, if you had Nextel services and you were in a city, like I worked for newsrooms pretty much all my life, so I've worked with all these different carriers and found out years ago, I mean, I'm talking tens of years ago, that they had priority routing for first responders. So here in New York City, on many occasions, our newsroom folks, the field reporters, would have their Nextel phone or a cell phone, head to a location, be talking to a live hit. We all do customary live hits from a phone, and suddenly they can't get connection. They got full bars, but there's no connection. And that's what was happening, the prioritization taking place. Now, you have Max Connect account and you're at an event and suddenly there's a first responder incident, there's a good chance you may lose your connection because first responders are above you. So just keep that in mind. But that doesn't happen every broadcast. But the Max Connect approach makes total sense. And I have to say, and Kirk, you were there for this, at NAB 2019, Josh had, I think, several Max Connects being used in several different locations at the convention and worked like a champ. And I believe one of the broadcast distributors who has their TV channel was pretty much solely on the Max Connect for the entire 4 days. And from what I could see, when I'm watching and talking to some of their staffers, they had zero issues with the quality. So if you could make something like that happen at NAB, right, 80,000, 90,000 attendees. And if you looked at the RF spectrum for Wi-Fi, if you're curious, it was just a mess. It was expected.
Oh, a mess.
And if you look at the cellular network and what was going on, that too was, at the max. I mean, they roll in cows or, cellulars on wheels, and even those were overloaded. So, credit to Josh and his thinking and the Max Connect concept, and it makes total sense for broadcasters. And it's a great alternate STL link. It's a great, outside broadcast setup or remote broadcast. There's a few things it's great for. Backhoe fade at your studios. Now that everybody's so big on the fiber, it's no longer in the air, wireless. You tend to put yourself more at risk, so you may want to consider a cellular backup for some of your critical services in the event of backhoe fade. And it's time to rethink things. But I think what Steve's got going on, maybe something like that makes sense to consider.
Steve, we don't have a whole lot more time. I want to talk about airplanes for just a minute, but I want to put that off. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your remote control operations? That if somebody wants to follow in your footsteps and try what you've tried, what would you tell them? How would you tell them to get started?
Don't be afraid to try stuff. I mean, it's really what it comes down to is just trying different things and see what works for what you want to do. You could do it with really any hardware realistically. If you were creative enough.
Wow. All right. So, Steve, I used to fly little planes. You still do, and fly a bigger plane. What I think you said you had a 421. That's a twin engine plane.
Yeah. 421.
So how do you are you able to combine your love for radio and technology with your love of flying?
Yeah, no, it's really helpful because I can jump in the plane and go visit one of my stations, and all my stations are far from where I live. It seems like, so I can go visit a station without having to drive 8 hours or something. But it's handy for that, especially like if there's an emergency or something. Yeah.
I saw some great pics of your kids in the plane. That's pretty special to be able to take kids along.
Oh yeah, they love it, and I like taking them. They like one of them likes to steer, so he likes to just make the wings go up and down.
Wait a minute, I saw a picture of it. Gets sick. I saw a picture of a kid in a booster seat, in a child seat, strapped in. Was that kid in the front right seat?
No, I think that was in the back at that point.
Okay,
maybe. I don't remember now.
Toddlers' feet don't reach the pedals.
Thankfully. They don't reach the pedals.
That'd be a lot of fun if they did. Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, that's so cool to be able to combine, two loves that you have, flying and getting to your radio stations quickly. I used to, when I was a contract engineer, I flew to stations and had a few, adventures and one or two misadventures. But in all, it was pretty good. Hey, Steve, we usually do something called the tip of the week, and Chris is always Johnny on the spot with a tip of the week. We do it after this last commercial break. And so I'm going to surprise you here because I didn't tell you about it earlier. You might think of a tip of the week, something specific that a listener could walk away with and maybe do something with after hearing your advice. A lot of advice you've given out right here on the show, but so maybe there's something worth reiterating or something new. And Chris, you'll be up too in just a minute. Our show This Week in Radio Tech, episode 441 with Kirk Harnack, me, Chris Tobin, and Steve Rubin. We're rolling along here. We've been talking about remote control operations and amazingly about virtualization. I wasn't aware we were going to talk about that. So it's coming up more and more. Our show's brought to you in part by our friends at Lavo. We'll be right back.
There has probably never been a better time in history to buy a new radio mixing console. Today's consoles are more sophisticated than ever, with more features and functions than you can shake a stick at. But Have you noticed how complicated they are? There's a sea of knobs and switches and displays and buttons. Some of them look like you might need a pilot's license to do your show. Well, a board doesn't have to be complicated to be powerful. Just look at the new Ruby mixing surface from Lavo. The first thing you notice is how smooth and streamlined it is. Ruby has lots of cool tech, but what it doesn't have is that confusing ocean of buttons that clutter things up. Now, we all know that there are some console features the jock only uses once in a while. So why dedicate controls to them? Ruby fixes this problem by moving those once-in-a-blue-moon controls to a touch-sensitive, customizable GUI that happily shares screen space with your other studio software, helping you fight control room clutter. Thanks to this design innovation, talent that use Ruby produce smoother shows with less errors. Controls that are used the most fall naturally to hand, while functions that rarely need adjustment are easily controlled with just a couple of clicks in the context-sensitive GUI. And Ruby has cool features you won't find on other boards, like Auto Mix, an intelligent gain writing function that guarantees the perfect mix for multi-mic morning shows and call-in segments. Dual mode snapshots that instantly switch the motorized faders between on-air and production modes, and enough DSP and I/O options to make even your pro sound pals green with envy. And because quality is as important to Lavo as it is to you, every console is proudly built to fanatically precise standards at Lavo's own factory in Germany. If you're ready to declutter your control room, do yourself a favor. Check out the new Ruby and the other cool Lavo radio tech at www.lawo.com/TWiRT.
Thanks a lot to Lavo for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. So glad that you're part of the family, along with our other great sponsors. And hey, listeners, viewers, those of you who like This Week in Radio Tech, it's really important if you go to our sponsors and let them know that you heard it here. We really do appreciate it because we need their support, and we need your support too of our sponsors. All right, we're about to wrap up the show, but before we do, we've got a couple of tips of the week, and I'm going to hit up Chris Tobin first with a tip. And maybe the tip today is don't get on a New Jersey Transit train, but you've probably got something better.
I wish it was as easy as that, but it's not. Well, yeah, the tip today is something simple and something I've just recently done at my transmitter site, and that is I keep a spare set of clothes at this transmitter site. Now, you may say to yourself, why would you bother? Well, what happens if you're at the office one day, you're doing your normal office attire, and then suddenly you have an issue at the transmitter site, and you have to run out? Maybe you're in a suit. Maybe you're in a sports coat. Do you want to really be working on the cable trays or racks and with your good attire? No. So keep a bag of a change out of clothes if possible, and a pair of shoes at the transmitter site. I do that all the time, and I actually took advantage of it the other day when I had to go from the office to the transmitter site. So it was quite convenient. Also, another thing to think about is when you're at the transmitter site, maybe check your backup systems. I was talking to a friend of mine recently who had some issues and had no idea that one of his backup systems was not properly functioning, though remotely it appeared that it was. So he was on site and checked it out and actually realized what was going on. So give that some thought. Yeah, I know you can do it remotely, but sometimes you might have to be on site just to make sure it actually works and let it run for a while. Maybe make it a routine that once a month or twice a month or maybe once every 2 weeks you switch to the backup line and let it run on air and make sure that everything is in order so you know it's there when you really need it. And if something goes wrong when you don't need it, you can at least have time to fix it. So give that some thought. And then the other thing is keep handy a small plastic container. Today I had to work on my transmitter and remove about 15 screws from the back panel to get to the power lines to check on some voltages. And sure enough, I almost started losing them on the floor. So a little plastic container was ideal for that. I know this is simple stuff. You may say, oh, yeah, I do that all the time. Trust me, I have been in many a place where somebody goes, oh, where do we put those screws? And they're on the top of a rack. Hand goes across the top of the rack, and what do you hear?
Boom!
Oh, that sound of metal hitting the concrete floor of the tiles. Yes. So I'm just throwing that out there as a reminder. I'm sure many of you do it already, but just for those of you who may have forgotten, go, oh, it's right, I don't have one of those, and I could have easily done that last week, so maybe I should think about that. So just give that some thought. It's handy.
Good advice, and hey, I'll even dovetail your advice about the change of clothes with where to get that change of clothes. Now, you may have some extra socks and shirts and stuff like that hanging around your closet, but if you don't, go to a thrift store because you can get everything you need at a thrift. You can get shoes and socks, probably maybe not underwear. They don't sell underwear at thrift stores that I know of, but you have to supply that yourself. But certainly some pants. Hey, they have overalls or coveralls at thrift stores, lots of stuff like that. So you're probably not, you may never ever wear these clothes, may never. So yeah, get them from a thrift store and support that industry. Works real well. By the way, I've got a suit that I wear on television doing the weather from time to time. It is it's a double-breasted suit, and I got it from a thrift store for like $4. And it looks great. I found out where the problem is, though. It almost looks like another TV person had the suit, because in the back of the collar, it's really worn and tattered for about a half-inch space there. It's almost like that's where they clipped their IFB and tore up the top of their collar, clipping their IFB there. So, hey, maybe it's somebody else's famous suit. All right, Steve Rubin, got some advice for us to take away and maybe act on?
Oh, I think it's relevant to the remote thing, and that would be don't put any of this equipment on the internet without some sort of firewall and VPN. A lot of stuff shows up on Showdown that really shouldn't. I've seen consoles, index.
That is so true.
Transmitters, usually with the default password, which is good to demonstrate to my friends, but not the best thing to leave open to the world.
And that password should be the
morning phone calls.
That password should be the last line of defense, not the first. So there should be layers, and a great first layer is a VPN. Don't have anything open except you got to have a VPN with a strong password, and that's how you become part of that network where all your gear is, right?
Yeah, we have site-to-site VPNs between all of our stations, and then we have to use client VPNs to get into them so we can connect to things.
What brand or model of router do you like to use to set that up?
I think we have one of everything. We've got some Cisco's, we have some Ubiquities. We have some Cradle Points. We have a little bit of everything.
Okay. But you still can set up all that point-to-point VPN between the sites. Yeah. Cool. Good advice. Yeah. Don't put equipment on the internet. That's very true. Very, very true. All right. Hey, guys, we got to go. Steve Rubin, thank you so much for taking an hour of your day and spending with us. It's just a pleasure to talk with somebody like you who's enthused about radio and enthused about technology and making them work for you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. And Chris Tobin, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your hustle to get in. Anything else going on in your world, Chris, we need to know about before we go?
No, all the same. Just keeping busy. A lot of videos. That's all. Music videos.
Oh, that's right. At your radio station, huh?
Yeah, it's Jazz Appreciation Month, and we got about 5 more to go, and we should be done. So I think we had about 25 sessions we did in the last month.
So I'm not sure if it's next week or the week after, but pretty soon we're going to be talking about this technology. Actually, it's a company, but they've been around long enough that a lot of people use this name, kind of like Kleenex or Xerox. It's CleanFeed. We're going to be talking to Mark Bakos from CleanFeed.
Oh, excellent.
I'm not sure if that's
excellent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's next week or the week after, but that's coming up. We'll do something fun next week, no matter what it is. Hey, I want to thank Suncast, our producer, for producing today's show. He's always Johnny on the spot and takes care of us real well. Also, thanks to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. Without him, well, we wouldn't be here. Neither would a bunch of other shows. So check him out at GFQnetwork.com. GFQnetwork.com. Tell your friends about This Week in Radio Tech. We appreciate it very much, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.